And 5, 6, 7, 8. Hello, everybody. This is the Smart and Public podcast where we talk about careers and business and life through the eyes of public relations and communications experts. We're recording this opening after the fact from our amazing interview that we just had because Miss Katie Duffy was not able to join. So we thought that we'd start out with a little intro and have some fun and talk about our friend Jane Hynes, who we interviewed this week, which is amazing, and give her a little love, even though Katie couldn't be there.
I know. I'm so sad. And so I wanted to jump on and firstly apologize to Jane, which I also did separate to this recording.
Okay,
I did
good.
apologize. But like guys, this time zones, jobs, life, it's very hard to coordinate the timing of everything. And obviously with our guests, we want to be super respectful of when they're free and when they're able to do things. And best laid plans, I was available, and then I had a last minute thing come up for work that I needed to be on. So Katie Boyson rode solo on this one. So super thankful. But I feel like, as much as we are a dynamic duo, there are absolutely times where we may need to ride solo and do guests. But yeah, super sad to have missed Jane. Jane has been both of our bosses. She was the big boss at Salesforce when we both joined at different times. And we absolutely loved working for Jane. And we had been wanting to get her on for a while and working through schedules and all that stuff. And she so graciously said yes straight away as soon as we asked her, and then just trying to make it all work. And so we really didn't want to not do it. And move it. And so, yeah, that's what happened. So I apologize to everyone else also that I was not able to do it, but I know Katie will have killed it. And I know, you can probably share, Katie, like, I'm sure it was an awesome episode and you
Oh, it
got
was so much fun. I just got to fangirl essentially for the entire time and just pick her brain and learn 100,000 lessons. And it was a lot of fun. So we're really excited for you guys to have a listen to this episode. So maybe without further ado, we let you do that.
Yeah, enjoy.
Welcome to the Spartan Public podcast. Now, I know Duffy and I just talked about this a little bit in our intro, but we've got an amazing guest today. We have Jane Hynes, who's the VP of Global Communications for Google Cloud with us. Now, her track record, I will let her talk about her career in a second. Hi, Jane, by the way. I always feel awkward when I don't talk to people. Jane is not only somebody that was really helpful and inspirational to me early on in my career when I started at Salesforce. She really took me under her wing. I started out in an acquisition team of Heroku, and we were kind of figuring out where we fit within the platform, within the storytelling, and therefore also me trying to figure out where I fit within my own place on that team. And you just took me under your wing. You taught me so much. You really taught me a lot about stakeholder management, particularly in a huge company. And I just freaking love you, Jane. Thank you so much for being on the show. Jane, maybe just start out, talk about your career, tell us a little bit about your kind of journey and where you are now and how you got there. But I will probably interrupt you 100 times of stories that I remember as you go along the way.
All right. Sounds awesome. Let's see, my journey. I am not your typical PR person or comms person. I was a biology major in college. And my father still asks me, now that I'm 30 years into my career, if I still think about maybe going back to medical school. And I basically got out of college and was waiting tables and just wanted to get a job that I didn't have to ask anyone if they wanted fries. And so I landed at a little PR agency just north of San Francisco that did arts and entertainment PR. I did local music festivals and film festivals, and it was a ton of fun. But I needed little things like health insurance. So I ended up going into the technology world, and it was when the dot-com bubble was happening. I landed at a very cool little PR agency called Outcast Communications that had two female founders that really kind of taught me, all the ins and outs of navigating the technology landscape, and really gave me the foundation for my career. When I was there, one of my biggest clients was a little company called Salesforce.com.
How many employees did they have when you started there?
Let's see. When I started working on the account, they probably had 50 or 60 employees.
That's crazy to me.
And then when they asked me to come in-house, I think there was less than 500 employees. So it was pretty small.
Holy moly.
Yeah. So their PR person was taking off on a new adventure in life, and I, was starting to get a little bit itchy. And so they said, "Hey, you're going to come work for us now, and you don't argue with that." And I kind of assumed I'd be there for 2 or 3 years and see how kind of this whole .com thing played out. I ended up spending almost 15 years at Salesforce, and I went from being the kind of one and only PR person to having the ability to, live internationally and build up the international programs and come back and really think about, building up the team. So it was a beyond wild ride. And then let's see, after that, I landed at a little company called Google, and a little side division that was before it was even called Google Cloud, and had the opportunity to come in there and really just experience another high growth situation and build another great team here. So it's been a lot of fun, and I'm very very blessed.
You're pretty much the master of high growth and scale now at this point. Thinking about and I want to get to kind of you as a leader and what that looks like. But what I want to dive into first is, in the early days at Salesforce and even early days at Google Cloud, just thinking about the opportunity that you had on defining a market, from executive and stakeholder management and messaging development, getting the internal teams on board, getting leadership on board, getting media on board. What has that experience been like?
Salesforce was, I think, particularly exciting because it was an entirely new market. When you think about it, in the 80s and early 90s, if you wanted software, you literally went to a store and you picked out a box and then you went and stood in line and paid for it, right? The internet kind of changed all that, and Salesforce was really the pioneer in, back then, what was called software as a service, which we now call cloud computing. But it was an entirely new market, and people didn't understand the technology model. They didn't understand the business model. And so we had to really do a ton of education. And it was really in partnership with our friends at Analyst Relations and Investor Relations, because there's really an echo chamber when you think about kind of all the different, kind of opinion formers that are out there. And just, just kept pounding the pavement. And we had to talk about why it's different, and what are the benefits of this technology model, and everybody's on the same code base. What are the benefits of the business model? You had this recurring revenue stream, which was more predictable for the financial analysts. And so it was just a lot of pounding the pavement and repetitive, and a lot of relationship building, and making sure that we really educated people so that they understood not just kind of the product, but what the company meant to the entire industry.
And what did that look like from a stakeholder perspective as well? Because I can imagine Jane coming in with less than 500 people at Salesforce, and there's this huge task of storytelling to take on. What did that look like? Who were your partners in that, aside from the AR team and that kind of stuff that made that possible?
Obviously, their Salesforce was a founder-led company, and having a spokesperson that was very outgoing and that really understood the power of communications and wanted to find ways that he could leverage the model to help him get his message out there. And so it was a lot of time just hitting the phones, getting people on board, building the relationships, and also making sure that you had to kind of make sure the stakeholders knew, here's the objections that you're going to get in this meeting. Here's
Yeah.
how you need to, think about messaging this as we, kind of move forward. And, and so I think it was a lot of, kind of coaching on a two-way street, and just, activating. It was just
Yeah.
nonstop.
It sounds exhausting, to be honest. Do you think that what you went through back then with, software as a service, all of that kind of messaging, do you think that's similar to what we're seeing right now with AI and how people are trying to message it?
I think to me, AI is a little bit different. It's kind of the next big new frontier in technology. When we were working on Salesforce at the beginning, we were kind of the only ones with this model. With AI, all the big players are involved, and everybody is kind of, like competing for a piece of the pie. And so AI feels a little bit more to me, like big data or mobile,
Mm,
where everybody knows it's going to be huge and they're all just kind of, trying to understand what piece of the puzzle they can play and how they can differentiate in the market and how they can make themselves of value to their customers.
yeah, I agree with that. I also think that software as a service was such a foreign concept because of where the internet was in its stage as well. I feel like AI, people know what big data is. Like people know what the components that make up an AI platform or feature tool are. And so it's a little bit easier to wrap your head around. I can just imagine that being the messaging task that you must have gone through. I can imagine being intense. From that time then, what are some of the lessons that you kind of took away that still impact your career?
I think there's so many things that you could apply to kind of any situation. Let's see, off the top of my head, one thing that we did a lot of was we used analogies to make
Mm,
things easier to understand and more digestible. The big thing is that you just have to make sure that they're good, right? You have to make sure that they're catchy and that they're, easily understandable. I think the other big lesson that I learned working with, a spokesperson, like Market Salesforce, is be quotable.
mm,
Sometimes 3 words are way better than 3 sentences. And, kind of keep it short, keep it punchy, and don't try and work every last detail and, make it something that's interesting that people want to hear.
yeah.
Um, I think there's also, there's kind of been, when you're thinking about your storytelling, you know, everybody wants to have some kind of tension in the story. There's got to be some conflict, some drama in there. And so be intentional about what you want that tension to be. Because
Mm,
if you don't kind of come with the tension, somebody's going to make it up for you. And so, kind of be thoughtful about, where you can kind of lean into different kinds of tension.
yeah.
I think the other thing that we did that was really interesting at Salesforce is, if we couldn't find, kind of a luminary or an expert that was really well known that, that was, kind of talking about a topic that we were really interested in, we would just help create people. And we would find somebody that was really passionate about it, and we would kind of put the surround sound around them. It was kind of like the early days of like, creating influencers.
Totally.
There was no TikTok back then, but
Mm, yep.
the same concepts still apply.
And you're talking about externally from outside the business, like someone that already kind of has a presence or a strong opinion.
Yeah. Well, and I think also, when you look at the 2000s, we didn't have the platforms that we have today
That's so
for as
true.
much of the owned stuff.
Mm,
It was all about press releases and media interviews. It wasn't until, you kind of got into the knots that, blogs and your own channels,
yeah.
podcasts, like these are all things that weren't around really 20, 25 years ago.
That's right. I would
And
say any
so
of them, really.
yeah, so the ability to really own your own message and have the platforms in order to, distribute it, social channels, all those sorts of things, those are relatively newish.
Yeah.
And so, those were kind of, emerging channels that you had to figure out how to take advantage of.
Yeah. God, it's crazy to think about all of the opportunities and channels that we have now that we use versus what we had back then. I know, Mandy Galmay, we had her on the call, maybe, I don't know, a month ago. And she was talking about faxing press releases, and she had to do 200 faxes.
My claim to fame at my first PR agency that I worked at was that I managed to program the fax machine so that I only had to send the media alert once and it hit all the local TV news stations.
Jane, save some cool for the rest of us, Jane. Like, come on.
I also set up email at that PR agency, so I'm aging myself now.
Did they have your face like on a plaque on the wall there? Just like, I love it. So thinking about where you are now versus then, I know you've got your team at Google Cloud, but just thinking about kind of what the topics are and the shifts in with AI and everything, like what's hot with your team right now? What are people discussing? Like, what are some of the topics that are top of mind for them as you're thinking about like 2025 planning and that sort of thing?
Yeah. I mean, I think it is, some of it is still that, how are we going to leverage some of our own channels, and are we on the right channels to reach the audiences that we're looking to connect with? But, I mean, I think everybody in the communications industry right now is also looking at how can AI help me do my job? We all like to think that we're not replaceable, and, but there are certain tasks that like, if you've got writer's block on a press release, if you've got, if you're trying to, just give me a first draft of a plan that I can kind of rework and react to, there's a lot of amazing tools out there, that can help you get started.
Yeah, I think about AI, and the reason I struggle with it is I feel like it's cheating. Like, I feel like I should be able to come up with these concepts and like this structure or this outline myself. And I almost feel like I'm cheating myself when I use it. But the more that you use it strategically, like if you're say like, here's 4 topics, like think of headlines for all of them. And then you just take those and then you build off the back of it and actually create your own headline. There's just so much help in that, especially as a consultant where I'm just by myself over here, like bouncing off the wall.
Well, and I also think about the time and energy that goes into like things like coverage reporting. And it's like, you can just put 10 story links into a Google Doc and ask Gemini to summarize them for you,
That's genius. Why haven't I thought of that? Jane, this is why you're the boss.
Lot of amazing new tools emerging. And we're just at the beginning. And it's only going to get better, and it's only going to get more interesting.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think, people in comms are used to recreating themselves and used to recreating the message. So this is going to be a fun next challenge for all of us.
Okay. So we've talked a little bit about what you're hearing from your team and hot topics, but something that I would love to kind of get a sense from you is, where are you learning from? Like, what are your networks look like? Like, how do you continue learning and figuring out what that looks like from a very senior role?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think we all need to be constant learners. In the technology world, everything is, shifting all the time. It's changing dramatically, like every decade. So first off, some of it is just having the mindset of being super open-minded, questioning things, trying to understand. I mean, I feel like I learn something new every day, and it kind of comes from all directions. Sometimes it is coming from, stakeholders in the business who, are, sharing insights that they're hearing from customers, or showing us, new technology that hasn't been released yet. And, here's what it's going to be capable of doing. Sometimes it comes from industry peers. Having that network that you can, hey, have you ever tried this before? Like, did it work? Or people on my team have different areas of expertise. And so I rely on them too. I'm one of the old people now, and I didn't grow up with a social media account, and a phone in my pocket. So being able to tap into folks that are more dialed into the creator networks and things like that, we all have to just, be ready to learn from anyone all the time.
Yeah. It's such an interesting thing with learning as you start to scale in your career and kind of get to that higher level. I feel like I do a lot of learning through advising and like coaching and helping people now.
Mhm.
Because like you said, people come, like the younger generation comes with all of these different perspectives and different ideas. And even just the way that they're looking at technology is just so interesting to me, especially because we're talking about it all day and just trying to find new angles and new ways to kind of spin it. And so, yeah, I just find that so interesting. I don't know. Do you take classes or anything like that? Or I mean, you probably don't have time. Why am I asking you that?
I'm not one of those people. I know people that do. I am not one of those people. I have to
Mhm.
admit I'm also not one of those people that like wants to snuggle up with a good business book. Um,
You, you know what? I love to hear it. But David Swan, you'd remember David from Sydney Morning Herald. He was telling us that in his downtime, he also could not stand a business book. Like doesn't want to read about technology. He's like, put The Simpsons on and just let me rot. Like,
Yeah, I have the joy of being the mother to a 10-year-old, so I get to drive to dance rehearsals and soccer practice and
yeah,
all the things. And when I do find 5 minutes, I don't want to be reading anything.
that's true. You just want to have some time away. Yeah.
Yes.
So kind of jumping back into your role and as you're becoming more senior, like how do priorities shift? How do you prepare yourself for growth and like what a next role could be like? Like what does that look like as you get more senior?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, when you start off in a comms career, you are kind of a taskmaster, right? You kind of are learning all of the various skills that are gonna, enable you to do things, whether it's media relations or, under like getting to be a good writer, or maybe you have a specialization in speech writing or, whatever it might be, right? And so you're kind of just doing comms. And then as you kind of start kind of evolving, you really change into a consultant for the business. And
Mm,
so it's not just about understanding a product, it's about understanding the context around a product. Who are the competitors? What does your business look like? Are there products that are of higher margin than others? How are you thinking about pricing and packaging? So it's really about understanding the business really, really deeply. And then I think as you kind of get into of owning teams and being a manager and things like that, and when you're an individual contributor, you go and you build your plan every year. When you are the leader of an organization, you set a vision, and
yeah.
you have to kind of inspire people with the vision, and you don't go out and do the projects. You kind of are about aligning the stakeholders and making sure everybody's on the same page, and bringing people along, and trying to help people understand what is the motivation behind things, what is the business trying to achieve, and how can you creatively create campaigns that are going to help you get there.
Yeah. Yeah. So your role really just evolves into kind of being the vision and then being able to enable your team to carry that out.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm very hands-on, and to
Mm,
me, I have to keep enough of a hand in the work that I can still be dangerous. And that's how I learn the customer stories. That's how I learn the products. But in order to scale, you have to be able to get work done through others. And
hmm
so it's about developing a high-performing team, which is you've got to find new opportunities for people so they don't get bored. You've got to give them the
mm,
opportunity to stretch into situations that are uncomfortable for them. You've got to coach them into, how to work with this executive versus that executive because they all require something different. And you have to give them kind of the safe opportunities to be able to take risks.
Yeah, I love that. And I think that's a good segue into kind of my next question around you've got the pick of the litter at Google. You can hire the toppest talent in the world. What do you look for when you're hiring?
I've always maintained that I look for raw smarts and like a proactive can-do attitude. Because the combination of those two things, you've got somebody who is willing to get in there and figure it out, and then they're going to be actionable and go make things happen. So I think it's important that, people have the capability to come up with creative ideas, the flexibility to navigate through the unknown. I always, when I'm interviewing people, I ask about a lot of scenarios. Tell me about a time you did this, and, why was it important? Or tell me about, a failure in your career, and, what did you learn from it? And so you just get more insight into kind of how people think.
Yeah.
And I think that is, kind of a really helpful hiring tool. And also how they collaborate with others and how they think about, kind of that collaboration.
Yeah. I think that's a big one too, because I think comms is such a team sport.
It really is. And I mean, kind of going back to your last question about how do you think about growing in your career?
Mhm.
Um, I talked about early on, you're learning the writing, you're learning the speech writing, you're learning the media. And like those are the hard skills, right? And I think
Mhm.
as you get more senior in your career, the soft skills become so much more important.
Totally.
Your ability to influence, your ability to negotiate, on a given topic. And, I think that there's also kind of this secret hidden talent on how do you get people to kind of come to the right conclusion without
Mhm.
really even knowing that you were prodding them to do that.
Yeah. Prophecy is the master at that, I have to say. Yeah. Yeah. No, that's such an important point. And I think just as you're nurturing and kind of thinking about that top talent once you get them in, like what do the stages look like, or how do you help them along the way?
hmm when you're looking to help people grow their careers, I think the number one most important thing that you have to do is be honest. I think everybody kind of jokes around feedback as a gift. It genuinely is. You need to understand what the perception of you is, where you have room for growth and opportunities for growth, and you need to make sure that you're pushing yourself in those areas. And also being a manager of managers is very different than just managing individual
Totally.
contributors.
Yeah, that's a huge shift. I feel like big learning curve.
Huge shift. And
Hmm.
so I'm always thinking about who can cover for you while you're on vacation. Don't have it be the same person all the time. Give somebody that stretch assignment.
Hmm.
Thinking about are there projects on the team, whether it's managing an event or leaning in on an area that where you don't really typically work, and can you rotate certain tasks around and have people kind of volunteer for different things.
Hmm.
um I always told my team at Salesforce, and I tell my team at Google this as well, is I want to, I want my legacy to be that I turn out great, like, comms people. I don't want them to be great at one thing. I want them to be
Hmm.
great communicators. And in order to do that, you have to have different roles, and you have to have different jobs, and you have to learn how to manage different stakeholders.
Yeah.
And I also maintain that the more roles and the more shifting you do within an organization, the more valuable you are to the business.
Yeah.
And I think also, I mean, I kind of joke about this. Everybody's got their tool belt, right? And, you want to fill your tool belt with as many
Hmm.
things as possible from every role that you're in. And so take advantage of the opportunity to fill your tool belt. And so
Yeah.
it's good for the employee, it's good for the employer as well.
Yeah, and it's very relevant that you've just kind of brought that up as well, because Duffy and I were just talking in our last episode around succession planning and like this role of the CCO and how that's evolving into, it's not just a product person going into the CCO role, like they have to know everything about the business and it's this wider breadth. So I love that you've brought that up, because I feel like that's just so relevant to what we were talking about and makes us sound a lot smarter.
Yeah, no, and I always push on, all of my different leads. It's not just succession planning for my own job, it's what is
Hmm.
your succession plan? Do you have a number two? Do you have a number three? Are we bringing up the next generation so that we have more flex in the system, and are we giving them the right kind of opportunities to continue to learn and grow?
Yeah. Do you think that it's becoming more common practice for leaders to try to educate their comms people in different areas, or do you think it's still quite siloed?
I think it depends on a lot.
Mm,
I think the really good communicators recognize the benefit of, kind of that internal mobility and giving people the opportunity to do different things and to,
yeah.
kind of dive deeper into the business and have different experiences. I think that, in various companies or industries or whatever, sometimes the job's the job, and kind of it is what it is. So, I think you have to think about how you want to manage your own career. And sometimes being in a job for a few years is fine.
Yeah.
But sometimes you are wanting to lean in and do different things, and there's opportunity for that at different locations. I think the other thing that has been interesting over the last few years is you're starting to see more CCOs kind of expand into the marketing roles.
Hmm.
Um, and so I think that's been fun to watch, because I think the power of communications is really being recognized out there.
Yeah, I agree. I think that especially in a consulting position now and going into businesses and seeing how they want you to be a part of every little piece of the business just shows the value shift that comms is having, I think, right now in the market, which is great because we've been saying it forever, right? We're
Well, and
great.
I mean,
You
that's
need
why
us.
comms is fun, right? Because we have, we're in everything, we get to take
Hmm.
part in everything, and, we get to strategize with the executives from the product team and from the engineering team and from the HR team and from the,
Yeah.
sales organization. And, we get to weave it all together into this narrative and put it in the context of what's happening in the world and the industry. So, I think that's what makes our job exciting.
Yeah. And I love it because you get to package it all up and make them look great and then they love you. Not always, I guess. Sometimes it's crisis and that's not great, but still, you come out all right.
Yes.
Okay, I've got one more question. So, thinking about succession planning and different roles, when you're in a high growth company, this is kind of what it makes me think about is that there is change happening all the time, whether that's with your team going in and out or acquisition rumors or anything like that. Like, how do you manage that growth and some of the elements that come with it, like those rumors, like internally and externally? Like,
I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head. In a fast-paced environment, high growth environment, the one constant is change.
mm-hmm,
And that can be really uncomfortable for certain people, and that can be really exciting for certain people. So, I think there's a certain amount of self-awareness that's required. If you want to be in that high growth environment, you got to be ready, because no 2 days are going to look alike, and your calendar's going to blow up at least twice a week, and you have to be, you have to be in it.
mm-hmm,
Um, and as far as, kind of how do you, kind of navigate that, there's always going to be an executive change. There's always going to be an acquisition rumor. There's always going to be, kind of the distraction of the day. And,
mm-hmm,
my best advice is make sure you have a really strong North Star. What is the most important thing to the company, and kind of keep people pointed in that direction. And don't get distracted by
yeah,
everything else. I think there's another thing that I have always told my teams is, there's a lot of things out there in the world that you can't control.
yeah,
You can't control the economy. You can't control, who's buying your products or not buying your products. Well, sometimes you can influence that, but what you can control is how you show up
mm,
and the work you do. And so I always, really push people to show up in a way that you would want to work with you. Um, be positive, be inquisitive,
yeah,
be engaged, be in it to win it.
yeah,
And then, and be proud of your work. Um, if like,
yeah,
if you're gonna, kind of pardon my language, but if you're going to half-ass it, like, why show up?
Yeah.
You know, be engaged, work hard, and be super proud of everything you turn out, and have a standard of excellence.
Yeah. I also find that during a crisis scenario or during a rumor and things are swirling around in the company, the more that I can convey calm and not a big deal, the more that will then project and then kind of, vibrate through the rest of the team as well. The more energy that you give something, the more people are going to swirl around it, especially when you're in a leadership position.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And and I think, and like you said, those situations are going to come up, and you just have to be prepared for them. Like, what is our party line? Are we all aligned? Okay. This is the situation we're in. We know what we're going to do. This isn't a surprise. Let's just go do what we planned on doing. And, and it's fine.
Yep. I love that. Well, Jane, thank you so much for joining me. And I know Duffy is devastated. I've already mentioned this, that she couldn't be here, but we're just so grateful to have you on the show. Just wondering, I'll give you a chance now if you have a dumb in private that you want to share.
Let's see. I will share my silly dumb in private. This was not this week, but I was making a pie, and I just reached in the cupboard to, grab the vanilla so I could sprinkle a little in. Without knowing it, I grabbed the peppermint extract. And it turns out that peppermint apple pie is not very good. So
well, I was just going to ask, was it good? Like, was it worth the risk? No. Oh, God.
Read the bottle before you pour it in.
Oh, my God. Well, it's so funny. Andrew, Katie's husband, was one time grabbed the ginger instead of the garlic and gave everybody a surprise. So you're not alone. So don't feel bad. All right.
I
Well,
love it.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Jane. We're so grateful to have you on here. And we hope everybody enjoyed listening to this episode. If you have a topic or something that you want us to cover, please email us at hello@smartandpublicpod. You can also follow us on Instagram and TikTok at Smart and Public Pod, and listen to us anywhere that you listen to your podcasts. All right. Thanks, everyone. Bye.